The rest of the slides this week are really just little reminders of the ways in which we can hone our interpersonal communication skills. And I'm sure you've probably already come across all of these things in the course of management development classes and that kind of thing. This week we're looking at liking and persuasion, ways in which people's attitudes and ultimately behavior is changed by others. Robert Cialdini is one of the gurus in this field, and his reading to do with science and practice of influence will give you a little bit of an overview. The chapter is based on liking and how liking a person will influence the degree to which they can affect your attitudes and behavior. The second reading is all about humor. This is really to do with how our attitudes are influenced by our mood. So if somebody is of a good positive affect, they're in a good mood, maybe influenced by humor, then they tend to be more susceptible than the person that isn't. And have a look at your own lives and see if perhaps, you know, when you're sort of feeling a bit dour and it's been a sort of cloudy, miserable day for the last week or whatever, you may be more, it's maybe that you're more difficult to influence than when you're sort of feeling light-hearted and it's sunny and you're going to go water skiing on the lake or whatever. One of the other gurus in this field is Zions, and he's looking at how mere exposure can influence us. There is a golden rule in mail marketing, in other words, marketing that is done by continual mail shots. And if you send one mail shot, the chances of anybody really being influenced by it are really very small. Let's just say 0.1%. So out of every 1,000 mail shots that you send, you might get one sort of positive end result, say. And it depends, that's not a golden figure, but it depends on all sorts of other factors. But if you then send a second one, the chances are that you will get sort of something like 3 or 4 times the impact. And if you do the same thing for a third one, you'll get a similar kind of increase. In other words, the information in those mail shots has to be arranged a bit differently. It can't be exactly the same appearance and all the rest of it. But the actual content can be identical. The thing you're trying to sell them or convince somebody to do can be identical. And the fact of the matter is that by the time they get the third one, you're a household name in their minds. So mere exposure is a really interesting kind of way in which particularly commercial organizations will be able to influence us. I'm not going to do a commentary for the rest of the slides. They are designed to give you a perspective that I hope will string those 3 readings together. So I'm talking about communication and persuasion. The two, persuasion and influence are obviously intimately related, and then you have propaganda. And it's not a, propaganda is not really a scientific term. I use it here because I want to underline the fact that sometimes we have groups of people, political groups, religious groups, whatever, who are trying to influence us as opposed to individuals. So I'm really looking at influence being something that will be more of an individual kind of basis in your working environment. Propaganda will be something that is done by groups to try and influence you. So I'm looking at what persuasion is and how that's related. I'm looking at the mechanisms by which persuasion and communication will affect you. The persuasion, it comes from communication. Can you pay attention to the message of this person? Do you understand it? Do you believe it? Do you remember it? And ultimately, does it influence your behavior? There are two routes to persuasion. One is a very central route, where I try and persuade you that something that you need to do that you're not doing, or something that you're doing that you shouldn't need to do. And that's a very central route. There's nothing sort of devious about that. And then there is the much more peripheral route that people will take to try and persuade you. And so I go into that a little bit. We look at the routes to persuasion, when, for instance, one might be used rather than the other. We look at the elements of persuasion. We have the communicator and the message comment, and they both will influence how you will be persuaded. The communicator, if they've got credibility, if they're attractive to you, if you like them, that all has an influence. And the message content, is it a reasoned message? Is there sort of logic involved that makes sense to you? Are there discrepancies within it, perhaps illogical aspects to it, or things that don't hang together too well? And ultimately, with something we're going to talk about in a few weeks anyway, which is primacy versus recency. So there are various times when things that are said, they're said in a certain order. You'll remember the first one. On other occasions, when it appears that the last one mentioned will be the one that has impact on you. So we'll be looking at that kind of thing later on. So going back to persuasion and propaganda, I talk about a little bit about sort of what is the techniques that are used. These will be very, very obvious to you. The reason I write them down like this is really to emphasize that they can be categorized. And it might be interesting for you just to take a newspaper or a website and have a look at how these techniques are used. Anyway, I hope you find this week's activities interesting.